So, Christine, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
It's also a lot of the chaos that we've been talking about, the back and forth.
Exactly. And this is exactly what the White House wanted, what they said this morning they were going to do. They were going to go to this D.C. appeals court and they would say, look, we want you to stay the International Trade Court decision for now while this moves forward. And the White House had said they would appeal directly to the Supreme Court if they didn't hear from the appeals court. Now they have heard from a D.C. appeals court pausing any tariff changes while the case is litigated. So not saying that the president does have the authority to do this, but just saying that while this plays out, they're going to reinstate those tariffs. I'll also point out that in this particular decision here, they're looking to consolidate some of these cases. There have been multiple cases filed against the president's trade agenda and his tariffs in particular. This particular case was states, also some small businesses who had said the president just lacks the authority in this particular rule that he used.
So do we have an idea how long the appeals process takes here?
Unclear. What I think is interesting is you've got another deadline here, July 9th. That's when those original, I put it in air quotes, reciprocal tariffs, when the president stood there in the Rose Garden with that big chart with all those numbers that he was going to charge people. Then he paused some of those, and then some went back on. But July 9th is when there's supposed to be some clarity that those reciprocal tariffs, that's what the International Trade Court said he did not have the authority to impose. Now, this D.C. appeals court saying, OK, we're going to pause that International Trade Court decision until this goes through the appeals process. So we're back to where we were a day and a half ago. And this is part and parcel, Katie, of the frustration for businesses and importers, because it just means there still is indecision overall about what happens next and what rates tariffs will be for these different countries in the days and weeks ahead.
Before the break, we were talking about the downside of worrying about what it might do to Trump's ego to know that there is something called a taco trade. Trump always chickens out. It is the story of his entire political rise.
I think that the risk that we were talking about before the break, which is there a danger in trying to goad or intentionally or unintentionally goading Trump? That's a real risk, and we know that because of his political career. So in 2011, Barack Obama gives this brilliant roast of Donald Trump at the White House Correspondents' Dinner after Trump had been going after him with the birther movement and so forth. And Barack Obama, in his cool way, just eviscerates him. And you see Donald Trump in the moment boiling over. And the reporting on it is that that was a really pivotal moment that galvanized him then to run for president. So he does detest being mocked, though he certainly likes mocking other people. So that risk is real. I think the fact that we are even having this conversation points to the bizarro world that we're in Trump 2 and in Trump 1, but particularly in Trump 2, where, we're thinking about, what if we make fun of Trump and then he'll respond in this way? And the chaos that will be unleashed could be really damaging for America's standing in the world and the American economy. The fact that we're having that conversation points to this weird environment in which, some people seem to be treating Trump like a senile uncle who needs to be appeased. And it's in the media, that's certainly not our job. Our job is to tell the truth as we see it. You see in Congress and the people around Trump, people continuing to try to placate him, trying to play to his worst instincts, to all of his instincts, in a way that's counterproductive, I think. And the question is when they will grow a spine in Congress, when some people might stand up to him, what would be the set of events that would trigger Congress behaving like grown-ups and not trying to just pledge fealty to this president?
Charlie, do you, on your bingo card, even play that game anymore? I mean, is there a point where they respond to their constituents instead of Donald Trump's whims?
Not in the foreseeable future, because, you and I have been talking about this for 10 years right now. How many times have they had opportunities to do that? The political costs are simply too high for them. And frankly, look, waiting around for Republicans to show any sort of independence, I think, is a fool's errand. Now, on the edges, perhaps they will push back, here or there. But the whole issue of tariffs has been so illustrative because it will have such a tremendous impact on the economy, on their own constituents. They have the inherent power to block the tariffs. They are the Article 1 body in the Constitution, and yet they have surrendered. They have ceased functioning as a legislative body in many respects. But, going back to your question about the dangers of humiliating Donald Trump, you know how I feel about this. I mean, I wish, we could humiliate him on a daily basis. I wish that we could mock him. But Charlotte's absolutely right. This is the bizarro world that we're living in, where everybody is walking around on eggshells, afraid to anger the senile uncle who has incredibly thin skin. And the thing about Donald Trump is he is, of course, a complete narcissist, but he has a very, very thin skin, and he's dangerous because he has the power and he has no restraint. And I think that's just something that kind of the reality that we have to deal with. Now, there are some people who say that, that's a counsel of defeatism, that, resistance is futile, that we can't do anything about it. But it is the reality that we're living in right now. And I think that to the extent that we can point out the absurdity of Donald Trump, the fact that we can, in fact, show that the emperor does have no clothes. And by the way, there's always a value to pointing out that the emperor is, in fact, buck naked when it is Donald Trump. I think we ought to take that risk.
Well, Robert, I guess I would push back a little bit on the premise that anyone humiliated Donald Trump other than Donald Trump. I mean, the truth of the number of times that he blinked is a data point that exists in public. We didn't no investigative journalist dug up the number of times Trump balked because of the poor reception to his tariffs. And they were announced, they were paused, they were raised, they were dropped. They were put back in, they were pulled off. 100 deals in 100 days, there were none. Now there's a framework for one with the UK and the beginning of talks in Switzerland with China. No framework, no deal. So and I am no economist, but I could read a newspaper. So no one's humiliating Donald Trump except Donald Trump.
Look, the reason the taco trade joke, which is kind of a dumb joke, stuck is because it has this huge element of truth in it. And yes, a lot of times in the last, 12 or 18 hours since that conversation in the White House, people have either written me or mentioned me on social media saying this guy's dumb joke is going to cause a recession. And I don't like that at all. I meant to make a joke, not cause a recession. But there is a serious question here about, as Charlotte and Charlie have just argued so well, there's a serious question about a world in which you're not allowed to make fun of the president. He's the president. I am an inky-fingered hack making a dumb joke. I'm the one who's supposed to behave carefully around the president of the United States? How did we get here? I mean, the situation, bizarre doesn't even begin to cover it, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and Robert, I would argue if we enter into a recession, it will have nothing to do with you. It will be Donald Trump's policies that tip us toward a recession. And if you look at how, look, the study of, body of fiction around dysfunctional families, it's the same story all the time. An otherwise normal body bends and collapses around the mentally ill or addicted or most sick member of the family. A country is the same. So we had the Republican Party collapse onto itself around the dysfunctional leader. And then you had all of the, sort of partisan actors collapse. And now you're seeing Trump collapse the economy around his dysfunction.
It's not altogether unlike the inner circle of Biden collapsing around him. He was frail. He was really unqualified to be president. They knew it, and they collapsed around him. And that was no good. And similarly, treating the current president with kid gloves by his advisors or by the press or by anybody else is a bad idea. It was a bad idea with a Democrat. It's a bad idea with a Republican. We shouldn't do it.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. To put the news in the parlance of SpaceX, it seems Elon Musk's career as co-president to Donald Trump has had a bit of a rapid, unscheduled disassembly. Technically, it was kind of scheduled. His Doge campaign was always billed as temporary. But less than 6 months into this administration, the man who came in like some kind of MAGA rock star who was jumping around at Trump rallies, appeared in every cabinet meeting, seemed to be running the cabinet meetings, spoke to adoring crowds at CPAC, is now unceremoniously slinking out the side door. And I want to be clear here and be fair-minded, clear-eyed. By every conceivable metric, Musk's stint in government has been an unmitigated, abject failure. Any way you look on it. On the substance, it's just been wildly destructive and also volatile. Remember, like it was the email to everyone. What'd you do? 3 things. And then they just abandoned that. A lot of lifelong experts in key positions in our federal government have lost their jobs. We can't get them back. Important medical research. I mean, groundbreaking stuff has been paused or destroyed, possibly indefinitely. Government agencies across the board are functioning worse. If you talk to people in the government and you read the reporting, they are functioning worse than they were before. There are also enormous, almost sort of unspeakably large ramifications for people in the global south, where the Musk-led cuts to foreign aid will lead to incomprehensibly needless suffering. I mean, people will most definitely die as a result of cuts to AIDS relief program PEPFAR. In fact, Musk's fellow billionaire Bill Gates warns that cuts to USAID could cost millions of lives throughout the world, after Musk bragged about putting the agency through the wood chipper. So Musk did enormous substantive damage, both to our own country, to other people, some of the most vulnerable abroad. That's going to be hard to repair. But even by his own standards, because I don't think he cares about that, his so-called cost-saving efficiency program, DOGE, was a total failure as well. I mean, the world's richest man promised to cut, remember, federal spending by $2 trillion with a T dollars. Okay? By his own website's shoddy math, he managed to cut just $1.75 billion. That's less than 1/1000th of what he promised. He barely made a dent. It's a rounding error. Even the Libertarian Cato Institute, which is ideologically very supportive of DOGE's mission, wrote that Musk, quote, has overpromised and underdelivered on verifiable spending cuts. It was all a con. I mean, part of this is that Musk assumed, like so many people do, that the government is full of lazy bureaucrats who can be fired without any meaningful consequences. But even one of his own DOGE insiders had to concede it's not actually true. In an interview, tech founder Sahil Lavinia, who Musk placed at the VA, said, quote, I would say the culture shock is mostly a lot of meetings, not a lot of decisions, but honestly, it's kind of fine because the government works. It's not as inefficient as I was expecting, to be honest. I was hoping for more easy wins. Adding that now that he's there, he says he finds himself surrounded by people who love their jobs, who came to the government with a sense of mission driving their work. Now, like most administration officials who accidentally say true things, that guy got fired for that interview. But Americans in general did not like the behavior and the cruelty of DOGE. And now Elon Musk, with what is left of his tattered reputation, is doing media interviews trying to reboot his image and distance himself from it all.
You know, it's not like I agree with everything the administration does. So it's like I agree with much of what the administration does, but we have differences of opinion. There are things that I don't entirely agree with. But it's difficult for me to bring that up in an interview because then it creates a bone of contention. So then I'm a little stuck in a bind where I'm like, well, I don't want to, speak out against the administration, but I don't want to. I also don't want to take responsibility for everything the administration is doing.
I mean, again, you got to just concede it where it is. I mean, this is a guy who is profoundly charismatic, silver-tongued, eloquent, amazing communicator. Yes, it is a tough spot to be associated with those toxic Trump policies. Maybe that explains the sudden, massive unpopularity. But this is you, right?
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy. Chainsaw!
Did you feel that down into your toes? That full body cringe? Well, Musk is now leaving in disgrace because lots of people felt that way when they were around him. He was wholesale rejected by about everyone. We've seen report after report after report that everyone simply couldn't stand the guy. Doesn't matter how rich he is. Back in March, the New York Times reported on an explosive cabinet meeting where Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, and Veterans Affairs Secretary Doug Collins all tore into Musk for his haphazard cuts in their respective agencies. Earlier this month, The Atlantic reported on an expletive-ridden screaming match between Musk and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent that spilled out from the Oval Office into more public areas of the West Wing. That same article also quotes the General Counsel for the American Federation of Government Employees as saying, quote, "We kicked him out of town. If he had stayed in the shadows and done this stuff, who knows how bad it would have been, but no one likes the guy." No one likes the guy might be the best summation of Musk's forays into American politics I've encountered. His Waterloo, sort of electorally speaking, came in April. Remember that in the state of Wisconsin? Remember what he did there? Guy thought he was so popular, that he was such a good politician himself, that he flew in from out of state and wore a cheese head and flexed his newfound political muscles in the state Supreme Court race. And he spent a small fortune of his own money in support of the conservative candidate Brad Schimel, and it didn't work. His candidate lost by 10 points. And voters, they really didn't like Musk.
He's just a pushy billionaire, and he's cutting everything. The people need these things he's cutting.
He just makes me very angry. He uses money in ways that we're not used to. And I really think that, you know, he should just stay out of local politics. He should stay out of all politics, frankly.
That Wisconsin woman is not alone. In fact, voters everywhere don't like him. Nate Silver's polling average shows Musk's public approval more than 14 points underwater. That's bad. About 54% of Americans saying they disapprove of the billionaire. And Musk's intrusion into national politics has also had very real financial consequences for his companies. I mean, he's lost billions of dollars, at least sort of on paper, since he spent more than $270 million to get Trump elected last year. Tesla sales, the sort of crown jewel company of his, are down huge, especially in Europe, where they crashed nearly 50% year over year last month because Musk has absolutely poisoned the brand with his own toxic reputation. Here in the States, according to one report, quote, "A shopping center with a shuttered Bed Bath & Beyond store is in violation of a Detroit suburbs city code for storing dozens of Tesla vehicles on its parking lot." That's because there's so much inventory of these Cybertrucks, they can't get rid of it. I don't think it's a good news for your car manufacturer when your flagship luxury trucks are just sitting unsold in a random parking lot somewhere outside of Detroit, possibly drawing municipal citations. In fact, Tesla shareholders are now saying the company's in crisis, sending a letter to the company demanding, this is pretty funny, Musk return to work full time. That's an interesting idea for the CEO. Now, thankfully for them, it looks like he's going to have some more time on his hands right now. And so, again, in every conceivable way, Musk leaves the government worse off than he found it. His tenure in Washington was a complete failure, substantively and politically, and to his own reputation and to his own companies. He got high in his own supply. He convinced himself, because he's worth a lot of money, that everyone loves him, that the American public would fall in love with his antics. And it turns out they would really much rather he just go away. Claire McCaskill is a former Democratic senator in Missouri. David French is an opinion columnist for the New York Times, and they join me now. Claire, I think, what do you think that sort of obituary on his tenure in the government is going to read?
Yeah, well, I think you ran through it all and covered the territory pretty well. Unlikable, full of himself, immature, arrogant, wildly rich beyond most people's imagination. But at the core of it, Chris, I think he didn't really understand a democracy. You know, business leaders have an arrogance about them when it comes to government. They think too often, well, there are very smart people in government. The people who work for government are less than, and I run a big company and I know how to do it. But most of them, if they had to operate within a democracy, would probably fail like Musk did.
Yeah.
He didn't understand the basics of a democracy, that you don't take radical steps without the support of the people. And I've got a news flash for him. Debts and deficit are not high on the list of issues of the American people. If they were, we wouldn't have any. Trump didn't campaign on them. Trump didn't campaign on him. I've never had a big people demonstrate in Missouri about debts and deficit.
Yeah,
so what he was trying to do, he did with it. He didn't do with a scalpel. And really, honestly, if he'd done it strategically and carefully and slowed down to get bipartisan support, he would have gotten more done. Never $2 trillion. But he would have gotten more done and probably not done the damage he's done to millions of people across the globe.
Look, clearly the Trump administration is completely out of its depth on a lot of different fronts right now. And I want you to imagine having to walk into the White House briefing room today and explain all of that. It's not always easy being Caroline Leavitt, but today seemed especially painful to be Caroline Leavitt. So to help her out a bit, I thought I would answer some of the questions reporters threw at her today. Let's start with Jasmine Wright from Notice.
A Notice investigation found that the Hallmark Maha Commission report that was released last week cites studies that appear to not exist. We know that because in part we reached out to some of the listed authors who said that they didn't write the studies cited. So I want to ask, does the White House have confidence that the information coming from HHS can be trusted?
You know, Jasmine, that's a really good and thorough question. I don't usually do this, but I kind of want to see how Caroline answered that one.
Yes, we have complete confidence in Secretary Kennedy and his team at HHS. I understand there were some formatting issues with the Maha report that are being addressed.
I've heard a lot of things in my time, a lot. But formatting issues? Seriously? That's the best you could come up with? That was what was spit out of the system to come up with what she should say about the story? They put out a report that was full of errors, with broken links, and 7 of the sources they cited don't exist at all. And not for nothing, they also just canceled a $600 billion contract to develop an mRNA vaccine for bird flu, while at the same time trying to import ostriches exposed to bird flu to Dr. Oz's ranch. I am not making that up. That is what HHS is up to these days. Okay, I think we can all agree here Caroline's answer wasn't exactly great on that one, but I'm going to take the rest of it from here. All right, Peter Doocy, good to see you, my friend. What do you got today?
So the courts are basically telling you guys they think that the White House's policies, the president's policies, are in some way against the law. So why can't President Trump ask the Republicans that control the House and the Republicans that control the Senate just to make a new law?
Well, Peter, as I often like to say to you, there is a lot to unpack there. I'm just going to start with the fact that judges are only telling the White House that their policies are against the law because, well, their policies are against the law. And the panel on the tariff decision was unanimous and included a judge Trump appointed himself. And on your second point, he absolutely could ask Republicans in Congress to pass a bill implementing sweeping tariffs. If they did that, that would actually be a legal route. But not even a Republican-controlled Congress that's under the thumb of Trump would really want to do that, because these nonsensical tariffs are wildly damaging to the economy. Just ask basically any business and anyone on Wall Street, and wildly unpopular among the public, including the people who send them to office. Okay, Weijia Jiang from CBS News. What's on your mind today?
President Trump was asked what he thought about Elon Musk's claim that the big, beautiful bill increases the budget deficit and undermines the work of DOGE. And the president didn't actually comment on those remarks. He just talked about the need to support the bill. So what does the president think about what Elon Musk said?
Well, frankly, Weijia, he is probably pretty annoyed and probably pretty pissed off. But you can't say that out loud. He can't say that out loud about a guy who spent $250 million to get him elected and who still holds massive sway inside the party, primarily because he's the richest man in the world. So until Trump decides, which he may at some point, who knows, that he would rather have Musk outside of his political tent rather than inside, he's probably going to stay very quiet on what he thinks about anything Elon Musk says, which I bet Elon Musk also knows. All right, we have time for one more. Kristen Holmes from CNN.
President Trump said that he needed 1.5 to 2 weeks to determine whether or not he believed Vladimir Putin wanted peace. He has been in office now for 4 months. What does he believe is going to happen in the next 1.5 to 2 weeks that would change his opinion?
Kristen, You know well that Donald Trump loves to say things are coming in 2 weeks. I mean, it's sort of a tick of sorts. I can't tell you how many times nothing actually comes in 2 weeks. And when it comes to Putin and Russia in particular, Trump is in kind of a bind here because his strongman role model is ghosting him. So for Trump, there really are no good answers. But I suspect he's hoping that if he can just keep punting this down the road, 2 weeks at a time, say, because he loves to say 2 weeks, perhaps maybe you and your colleagues will get distracted and start focusing on something else that he's attempting to distract you with. But here's the thing. The American people see what's happening. They see what's happening on Russia and with tariffs and with Elon Musk and with RFK Jr. and with every abject failure coming out of this administration, which means that right now the opening for a political opposition for Democrats has never been bigger.
Welcome back. This morning, a closer look at President Trump's immigration crackdown and the lives upended by it. An NBC News exclusive report details the case of Andre Hernandez Romero, a gay makeup artist who was among the group of Venezuelans deported from the U.S. to CICOT, that notorious Salvadoran prison that was back in March when President Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act. After Romero's deportation, his lawyers fought to keep his asylum case open as a way to keep him in the U.S. legal system. But on Wednesday, a judge dismissed his case. I want to bring in NBC's David Noriega for more on his exclusive reporting. David, what else do people need to know about Andre's story, his case, and how it fits into the bigger picture?
Well, Ana, you know, Andre Hernandez is just one of the better known of these cases of Venezuelan men who were deported to the Supermax prison in El Salvador under the Alien Enemies Act. His story has resonated with a lot of people. He's a gay man who was a makeup artist for a state TV station in Caracas. He came to the U.S. He told his lawyers here in the U.S. that he had fled Venezuela because he was suffering persecution for both his sexual orientation and his opposition to the government of Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela. Now, those claims were the basis of his asylum case in the United States, which was in progress in an immigration court in the detention center where he was being held in San Diego, when that process was abruptly terminated when he was put on these planes on March 15th that were sent to El Salvador with no due process, no court hearings, no communication with his lawyers, and up to this day, extremely little information, virtually no information about who these people were or the legal underpinnings for the decision to remove them to El Salvador. Now, the fact that the judge terminated his asylum case is important for a few reasons. When we talk about due process in these cases, what we are talking about often are these pending immigration cases in U.S. immigration courts, often asylum claims like the one that Hernandez Romero had. Those were the processes that were cut short by Trump invoking the Alien Enemies Act. So the lawyers, not just in this case, but in similar cases across the country, we're trying very hard to keep those cases open as a way of basically preserving the vestiges of this due process that was stopped in its tracks. Initially, the immigration judges were sort of open to this. They were continuing the cases. They were keeping them open, even though the person in question was absent and could not be contacted. But recently, in just the last couple of weeks, judges have started agreeing with the government's motions to dismiss these cases. Now, the reason this is troubling to the families and the lawyers of these individuals is because it's essentially eliminating any trace, disappearing them from the American legal system. And this is, you know, this, as it has always been, is a story about due process. It's important to remind people these people had pending immigration cases that were legally being assessed by a judge. That is the process that was cut short when the Alien Enemies Act was invoked.
I know you've been in contact with Andre's mom and best friend. What are you hearing from them? And have they had any contact with him?
They have not had any contact with him, and every time I talk about these cases, I stress that these men who were sent to this prison are in functionally a black hole. They are completely cut off from contact with the outside world, with counsel, with loved ones. The United States government is not even acknowledging in court that they are there or identifying who they are. The only reason we know they're there is because we've seen pictures, some of the pictures that were released by the Salvadoran government, or some other pictures taken by media in other cases. The family of Andre Hernandez Romero is very distressed by the fact that his asylum case was closed. They saw keeping this asylum case open as, in their words, a beacon of hope that he might eventually be released and brought to the United States. Anna.
David Noriega, thank you so much for your reporting. And joining us now is Andre's lawyer, Lindsay Toslowski, Executive Director of Immigrant Defenders Law Center. Lindsay, as David mentioned, the asylum case was dismissed for Andre. So what does that mean for him? Does the U.S. have any skin in the game at all to get him out of that prison in El Salvador?
Absolutely. So we are continuing to fight, and we want to stress that his case being dismissed, his asylum case being dismissed, is not the end of Andri's story. He is the lead plaintiff in JGG versus Trump, the ACLU lawsuit that is seeking the return of the men who are in Secot, including Andri. We believe that they are in the constructive custody of the U.S. government still. There is an agreement between the U.S. government and El Salvador to hold Andri and the others, today being day 75 that they are there in that Supermax prison in El Salvador. So we will continue to fight in that court. We also intend to appeal this decision. We think the judge was wrong here. Andri's case should be able to continue. He is only not in the court in San Diego because the U.S. government moved him to El Salvador. They rendered him to El Salvador. He was seeking asylum. He was here. We were prepared to move forward, and we're still prepared to move forward. So we will not only fight within the asylum proceeding itself, appeal this decision to a higher court, but we will continue to fight for his return in federal court.
How frustrating is this for you as a lawyer, the system seemingly failing your client? You can't even contact him, right?
As I said, it's been 75 days. In my 15 years of practice, I have never had a situation like this where our client effectively disappeared overnight. We have been given absolutely no information. Every single government official that we have spoken to asking to get proof of life for our client has told us that they will not facilitate communication. In fact, the last proof of life we have are those horrific photos that were taken by a Time reporter of him being abused and slapped in the face as he arrived in El Salvador. We have had Congressman Robert Garcia go down to El Salvador and ask through the U.S. Embassy and to Salvadoran officials for proof of life for Andri, and we still have received nothing. It's an absolutely absurd situation. It's a violation of due process, and really it should be a canary in the coal mine for everyone of what happens when the government ignores the rule of law.
I know you are also involved in the case of Eric Eduardo Fonesca Solorzano, a father from Honduras who was handcuffed and detained just moments after a judge issued a dismissal of his immigration case. The LA Times described how his wife trembled in panic. His son watched in wide-eyed disbelief as agents quickly shuffled him to a service elevator, and he was gone. The boy was silent, sticking close by his mother, tears welling. How commonplace are situations like this now as the Trump administration tries to ramp up its immigration crackdown?
So beginning May 20th here in the Los Angeles area, and lawyers have reported across the country, we began to see these courthouse arrests. I was in court when Mr. Solorzano was detained. I was in while the government moved to dismiss his case. He opposed on the record and told the judge that he wanted to remain in his asylum claim in proceedings with his wife and son, who were also there in the courtroom. And over his objections, the judge moved forward and dismissed his case. He was unrepresented at the time. As we exited the courtroom, I followed the family out and actually witnessed the ICE officers, 6 of them, in plain clothes, not wearing uniforms, come up to the father, detain him, handcuff him in front of his son as tears brimmed in his eyes. I then, went downstairs with the family, and I can tell you that to see that little boy, he was only 8 years old, in his school uniform, who came to court. It was their very first court date after entering the United States with an appointment, doing everything the government has asked them to do to seek asylum in the United States. To see his face, it was almost as if he had aged 2 years from the time we left the 8th floor and got to the bottom floor. He was completely traumatized. And all of this so that the government can separate his father's case, put him in expedited removal because, we continue to see the Trump administration finding fundamental fairness and due process in our immigration courts inconvenient to their plans for mass deportation. They believe that it doesn't move things fast enough. But due process is a bedrock of our justice system. And so we, took that case. We will continue to represent that family, continue to fight for them. But he was moved this weekend 1,100 miles away to Washington State. And so we are continuing to represent him. But it is incredibly challenging what's happening in our immigration courts.
Lindsay, something you said really caught my ear, and that is this is an example of a case where migrants attempted to follow the so-called right way, to work within the system, did everything that they were essentially told to do, whether it's applying through that CBP One app previously to have their asylum case now into the system. I mean, are they suddenly now easier targets because they did it the right way?
That's exactly right. And that's why this is incredibly bad policy. It comes down to that fundamentally, because when you target people in immigration court, when you target the people who show up, the people who, came in, were paroled into the United States, go to their hearings, listen to the notices that they have, come in to avail themselves of the system, to seek asylum through that process. When you target them, what does that say to other people? It tells people that they should be afraid to come to court, that they need to go into the shadows. This is bad policy. It makes us less safe as communities if we are punishing the very people who follow the rules. And I sat in a courtroom yesterday and watched this happen to person after person who were surprised after they walked out of the courtroom to be accosted, sometimes by masked agents in the hallways, and taken into custody. These were people who came into court ready to move forward with their claims, who showed up when asked. It's incredibly counterintuitive to then target those people in enforcement actions like this.
Lindsay Toslowski, I can hear your passion. Thank you so much for joining us and shining light. Look forward to staying in touch.
As graduation ceremonies get underway this morning at Harvard University, the school will also face off against the Trump administration in a Boston courtroom. Last week, a federal judge granted Harvard a temporary restraining order against the new White House policy that ends Harvard's ability to enroll international students. Today, both sides will argue over whether that judge's order should be extended. Dave Arenberg, what are you looking for out of today's hearing?
Well, I put on my yellow ribbon because we must never lose sight of the hostages. I'm disappointed in my alma mater's response to anti-Semitism on campus. I think the Trump administration is going to focus on anti-Semitism, whereas Harvard's going to say, but what you're hitting us with is overbroad. What you're hitting us with is way beyond our response to anti-Semitism. And I think that's the key here, because if the administration had a specific goal in mind, and if they were consistent with it, they could succeed. But remember, when the administration went after Harvard, they sent them a letter that was an accident. It was not supposed to be sent to Harvard. And because this administration can never admit when they're wrong, they refuse to take it back. And so they're moving ahead with something they never intended to do from the beginning. So this whole war didn't have to happen. So I think Harvard is going to say, you guys are overbroad in what you're trying to do. You don't have the power to do this unilaterally. And thus, we're entitled to relief. I actually think they probably, meaning Harvard, will probably win in court. But this battle with the administration is far from over.
No, I think you're right about that, and we'll be staying on it in the weeks ahead. Former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, Dave Arenberg. Dave, thank you very much. Joining us now, professor of psychology at Harvard University, Steven Pinker. He wrote a guest essay for the New York Times titled Harvard Derangement Syndrome, in which he details the fallout of Trump's attacks on the university. Good morning, Professor. Well, let's start right there. There's been a series of broadsides from the White House directed at Cambridge, directed at Harvard. Talk to us about how you've seen that impact life there on campus.
Well, people are furious. They're distraught. They're bewildered. The Trump administration is using every means at its disposal to try to cripple Harvard, threatening to multiply the tax on the endowment 15-fold, canceling all grants, canceling all student visas, threatening to revoke its tax-exempt status. It's basically trying to strangle Harvard. It is an all-out war. I think Harvard would be happy to negotiate if they thought there was someone on the other side acting in good faith. But the fact that, for example, that letter was sent out in error, but then was not retracted, and that many of the demands of the administration are patently unconstitutional. They're infringements on free speech. They're infringements on the autonomy of a private institution. Means that there's some uncertainty as to how Harvard should proceed. It certainly is pressing its case in court in cases where the administration is acting contrary to the law, contrary to the Constitution.
Professor, it's Chris Matthews. You know, historically, I always knew, I grew up in Philadelphia, so I knew all about the quota system and the fact that Penn didn't have one for Jewish students. And it's the reason a lot of the great Hollywood producers went to Penn. It's just directors. It's just a fact. That mark on the Ivies, that they had these quotas about Jewish students, is that still making it an attractive target for Donald Trump to keep hitting?
Oh, I don't think that Trump cares about the old money wasp snobbish quotas against Jews. There have been problems with anti-Semitism at Harvard, largely, and other elite universities, largely as a spillover from anti-Israel zealotry among some of our students and some of our instructors. But the old money anti-Semitic snobbery is no longer a problem. The problem is disruptive protests. The problem is some of our instructors inappropriately introducing anti-Israel content into classes. The anti-Semitism report details these abuses, and our president, Alan Garber, has vowed to crack down on them.
Professor Simone Sanders Townsend, it strikes me that what the administration is doing to Harvard, specifically in this case, is a part of a broader strategy in some, ultra-right conservative circles, right? There has been a long war that has been waged, cultural political war that wanted to be waged on higher elite, if you will, institutions because of a perceived, if you will, bias towards conservatives. And I was a fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School, and I can tell you, I feel as though on the campuses, oftentimes there is an overcorrection to ensure that is not happening. What's your take on if this is happening in a vacuum or if this is in fact connected to the broader strategy in some conservative circles, putting universities and higher education institutions in the crosshairs?
Well, I think that's exactly right. And I almost hesitate to call it conservative, in that classical conservatism is committed to limited government constrained by constitutional restraints. This is more authoritarianism. This is what dictatorships the world over do. They try to disable civil society organizations, including the press, including arts organizations, the judiciary, law firms. And we've seen this pattern from the Trump administration. And I think the concerns over anti-Semitism are utterly bogus. The White House has had Holocaust deniers and Nazi sympathizers to dinners there. The concern about anti-Semitism, some of the punishments mention it, some of them don't. It's hurting Jewish students who are in the labs and hoping for the fellowships that are being canceled. It's hurting the Jews by making it seem as if the defunding of cancer research, the shutting down of labs is to advance Jewish interests. Jewish organizations are adamantly opposed to this. And speaking as a Jewish faculty member, I don't want it. It's not good for the Jews. It is a total pretext.
So Professor, I wanted to ask you sort of a follow-up on a conversation that we had yesterday. You've already talked about and said, hey, we've had some problems with anti-Semitism. Yesterday, I was talking about, as being one of those traditional conservatives, understanding that in the past, over the past 30, 40 years or so, universities, especially the tenure system, has often kept out classic conservatives. I'm not talking about people who call themselves conservatives today. I don't mean to give you a leading question here, but I just have to because I think it's the truth. It seems that the president of Harvard understands that. It seems from listening to you talk about the problems with anti-Semitism that you understand that. So I am going to ask a leading question. This is not hardball with Chris Matthews. I'll call this softball with Joe Scarborough. Isn't there a much better understanding in 2025 that speech has been stifled too much in elite universities in the past, that anti-Semitism has been allowed to fester too much in some elite universities in the past, and that traditional Burkean conservative voices have often been excluded by the tenure system in the past?
I think so. I co-founded and co-lead the Council on Academic Freedom at Harvard precisely because we thought that Harvard had not safeguarded intellectual diversity, intellectual freedom, and civil discourse. That's why we organized. We've gotten a lot of sympathy from the administration, from President Garber, from the provost John Manning. There is recognition that there is a problem, and some of it is indeed an exclusion of conservative voices. And as I said in the article, a little bit of DEI from conservatives probably wouldn't hurt. In that, I think that our students, I think our faculty would really benefit from a variety of voices. They don't have to agree with them, but as John Stuart Mill said, those who know only their own side of the argument know little of that. Even if you're not a conservative, you should sharpen your argument by protecting it against conservative counter-arguments. And who knows, sometimes conservatives are right.